All right, we're continuing with our reading of Dallas Pimiento, the final volume, Book 4, Bronco Fury, beginning with a piece called Financial Support Reckoned On. Carriage bolts held the gravy-stained tear duct to the third enamel postilion in such a position that 30 small families of the Gopher clan were able to cross from the bakery to the zoo before raw dough fumes sickened them all. Tita, a mama gopher, stood on a bench before the polar bear exhibit, clutching a facsimile of her baby and wondering why fruit as an ingredient in a food product was usually symbolized on the packaging by a picture of the sun. Tita's cousin Ted the Tweed sat atop a trash canister looking jealously at Tita. He wanted a facsimile of a baby. Once he had tried to make one out of an old flour sack stuffed with pink Play-Doh, but had become disgusted with his efforts within minutes of dancing about with it. Was it more sickening than the raw dough fumes? Asked Gonzaga Shrumped, the alligator attendant, after being told the story by Ted the Tweed's good friend Mrs. Contilda. I could not answer to that. The flour sack and its contents were destroyed long before I was born, and as to the raw dough fumes, to be honest, they don't really bother me. I don't see what all the fuss is about. Mrs. Contilda confessed this last in a whisper. She didn't want her fellow gophers to know how out of step she was. Brakefield, the leader of the surviving gophers, stood at the train analysis junction assembly of the gravy-stained tear duct with his newly chosen lieutenant, Handsome Beercake. Do you think the fumes have cleared yet? He asked, peering at the bakery. Hard to tell, Beercake answered. We could send over a guinea pig. He meant this literally. Some of the wealthier gopher families owned guinea pig slaves. There was less moral outrage about this than one might expect. After all, had not the gophers themselves once been the slaves of the capybara? This proposal, however, was met with a firm refusal from all slave owners. We've just started housekeeping duties, complained one matriarch, and you want to take away my help? She and her friends were overseeing the washing of the dishes in the little pond the flamingo stood about in. I'll volunteer, Ted the Tweed stepped forward once he heard the situation. You're a brave gopher, Ted the Tweed, Brakefield intoned manfully. I only asked that I be given a real facsimile of a baby if I survive, Ted the Tweed added. He hid his disappointment well on being told no. Almost an entire package of fruit cookies. Wash meat packed into oaken barrels as big as vending machines was the primary cargo of the big woman's good time. An old-fashioned freighter just arrived from the islands in the middle of the picture frame. Snifferson and his talking bird Squeamo stared at the lithograph while they waited for the dentist. Those barrels are clearly marked, aren't they? Squeamo remarked. It seems the artist wanted to make sure the observer knew what was in them. Yep, Snifferson agreed. And yet I haven't a clue what wash meat is. It sounds good, though, doesn't it, Snifferson, though a maritime romantic knew nothing about real life at sea. The dentist opened the door to the small but comfortable office and entered, followed by a large bird. When he sat down behind the desk, the bird sat down beside him on a vinyl stool. Please, gentlemen, have a seat, the dentist invited Snifferson and Squeamo with a wave of the miniature alpenhorn he carried. Thank you, Snifferson sat down in one of the chairs provided and gently lowered Squeamo from his shoulder to the chair beside him. Now, as I understand it, the dentist began, opening a folder on his desk that contained nothing of any relevance to Snifferson, Squeamo, or the matter at hand, you would like to have teeth installed in your bird's beak. Excuse me, Doctor, Squeamo interrupted. Before we go any farther, I have to ask, does your bird talk? No, I am afraid not, the dentist glanced at his bird. Her name is Sarita. I smuggled her out of Turkey 2 years ago when the avian massacres were at their peak. I've tried to teach her to speak, but so far, no luck. Pity, Squeamo clucked. She's a gorgeous creature. Oh, do you think so? The dentist smiled. Well, I'll have to draw her a picture conveying your opinion. She understands picture language then, does she? Squeamo asked. She seems to, the dentist replied. I must say that you speak very well yourself. It seems a shame to ruin that fine beak with teeth. I need them to eat wash meat. Squeamo's eyes went cold. Grubs on China. Rosary Mankinus, making her debut as a person of importance and notoriety on the set of Polygraph Pajama Show, sat quietly on the central sofa sipping tea and waiting for her turn to speak. At the front of the stage, before a small audience consisting mostly of friends, one of the two hosts, Brant Borden, explained the premise of the current episode. My associate Kirk Newbold has decided to start his own show within this one. He is hiding somewhere in the studio, interviewing his own guest. Borden rubbed his hands together lasciviously and smiled. A female friend of the darkness barked out a sharp laugh. Rosary Mankinus looked about at the other sofas where an assortment of oddities greeted her. Sharing her own sofa was an older woman wearing a turban. While Borden urged the audience and crew to find Newbold, the woman in the turban leaned toward Rosary. "So you're my replacement?" she said. "No," Rosary shook her head. "No, I'm just here to make my first public appearance as a celebrity." "Are you angling for your own show?" The woman put up her hand to keep her turban from sliding forward. "No, well, if I'm offered one, but mainly I'm an author," Rosary explained. "Ah," the other woman nodded, as if she now knew exactly how to categorize Rosary. She could deal with her now that she understood her. "And an illustrator," Rosary added, to make sure there was no confusion. "What?" The turbaned woman's eyebrows lowered. "An illustrator. Of my own books." A look of fear moved out from the woman's eyes like a wave. She was about to ask if her books were humorous when Brant Borden addressed himself to Rosary. "We have with us today Rosary Mankinus, author and illustrator of the new book, Leg Cramps of the Inefficient." "Well," Rosary corrected, "it's not really new, Brant. She was interrupted by a cackle of laughter from the scaffolding above, where Kirk Newbold was suddenly spotlighted. He was sitting there chatting with a regally attired gorilla. Make it out to Skip. The next place Rosary Mankinus took her tale of solitary devotion to art was the old Black Pig bookstore. Although there were already a goodly number of copies of Leg Cramps of the Inefficient on the shelves, she brought another boxful with her. "You understand this will be a joint book signing," the manager of the store wanted to make it clear to Rosary. "No, I didn't," Rosary answered, dropping the heavy box on the table set up for her. She noticed then that there were two chairs at the table. Behind her own was a simple cardboard sign with her name printed on it. Behind the other, however, was a large poster in green and purple advertising No Way Around It by Dallas Pimiento. Rosary took off her coat and draped it over the back of her chair. As she stared at the poster, glancing once at the locked front door of the store through which would soon issue the customers she must face, the manager, a woman in her early 40s, unadorned with makeup, but wearing a large crystal on a chain around her neck, explained that they reckoned on getting more traffic with two authors than one. "That sounds wise," Rosary agreed, smiling and purposing to face everything like a professional. She sat down, declining the offer of a cup of coffee. "When will Dallas Pimiento arrive?" she asked. "He's already here." The manager had no sooner said this than the great painter entered the sales floor from the back room. "Mr. Pimiento, your fellow author, Rosary Mankinus." The manager introduced the two to each other. "Miss Mankinus," Pimiento shook hands with Rosary. "I've been looking through your book. Some funny stuff." "Thank you, Mr. Pimiento. I didn't know you were an author as well as a painter." Rosary glanced at the bookstore manager, who was heading for the front door. It must be opening time. "I'm not really," said Pimiento as he and Rosary took their seats. He handed her a copy of the book. "This is a collection of a year's worth of my paintings." "Oh, I see," Rosary smiled, feeling less pressured. "With a little story for each one explaining what's going on," he added. "Fiction, you understand." He turned to the first of a line of college-aged boys waiting for his autograph. "I wash my hands of the Pope." Gerald sat down in his easy chair with a look of satisfaction spreading across his face. He reached over and switched on the ugly lamp beside his chair and shifted his bottom back and forth. When he was content with his position, he opened the book in his lap and began to read. In the ancient cellar, Lord Misselthum discovered the box that had once held the memoirs of Black Steve. "No more, however," Misselthum explained to Captain Sudmush. "They have decomposed into nothing more than this brown powder." "Let me see that powder, Geoffrey." Geoffrey must be Lord Misselthum's first name, Gerald thought to himself. Captain Sudmush examined the powder closely, taking up a small sample of it on the end of the christening spoon he invariably carried with him on a chain along with his mother's wedding ring. "You know, Geoffrey, I believe we could mix this in with our milk and make a highly nutritious beverage, Sudmush speculated seriously. My old English teacher would have pointed that out as an example of alliteration, though why that should be so important is beyond me. Gerald remembered grim Mrs. Rames, first with his usual disgust at the time wasted at the Republican private school he had attended, and second, with disgust at himself for still harboring such bitterness after the long years of adulthood. He turned back to his reading. I don't know, Carol. Mr. Misselthum looked dubious. Carol is the great Captain Sudmush's first name, Gerald said dubiously. That's not a very manly name. He closed the book around a finger and looked at the cover. On the front was the exciting artwork of Frank Frazetta, a picture of a naked man with a big, meaty posterior, fending off a giant porcupine with a futuristic-looking marshmallow shooting weapon. On the back was a photograph of the author, Nancy Cow. A woman would name a male Captain Carroll, he thought. Still unsure, he rose from his easy chair and went into the game room, where his wife sat pulling heavy winter clothing on a mannequin. Joey, he said, do you think Carroll is a name for a man? Could be. Joey spoke around the edge of... Could be. Joey spoke around this cigar in her mouth. In Poland. Naive adulation. A rum charger installed in the boot of His Majesty's Watch Pocket battleship provided the additional power necessary for the vessel to move about on land. Watching the first successful movements from the observation deck at the top of the tallest tower in his winter retreat, His Majesty the King slapped his hands together in glee and cried out, "Magnificent!" in a voice that could be heard by peasants picking grapes far below. "What's he shouting about?" one grape picker asked another. "He likes your work, apparently," the other answered with a gap-toothed grin. "Your Majesty approves?" Dr. Reuter asked the king as the latter turned to him with a rare, uninhibited smile. "You bet I do." The king stabbed a gloved finger at a button on Reuter's frock. "I'm going to personally drive that thing over to Flumpig City tomorrow and show little Bobby Aaron just how great his king is." Knowing nothing of these plans, Bobby Aaron, a 10-year-old boy in Flumpig City with a recently acquired habit of writing letters to the newspaper critical of the monarchy and the rest of the government, packed his necessities into a book bag and snuck out of the house. He had had enough of his grandmother's heavy-handed, old-fashioned approach to child care. If he was right, the circus would be leaving town today on its special floating train. Bobby intended to leave with it. "But what are you going to do in the circus?" asked Bobby's best friend Turk, whose house Bobby had stopped by to say goodbye. "You don't know how to tumble or nothing." "I'll sweep up elephant shit if I have to." Bobby smacked his fist into his palm. "I'm never coming back to this dump." "Jesus, I wish I could come with you," Turk whined. "But my dad would kill me." The next day, as the shadow of the king's newly altered ship fell over Bobby Aaron's grandmother's house, that sour old woman emerged from the front door eating an apple. "What the hell do you want, big shot?" she demanded of her royal visitor. Heavy metal type doings. The third goat to cross over the bridge found himself welcomed by a throng of ecstatic teenaged fans, most of them girls. While the goat waved and smiled, a little overwhelmed by the scene, a reporter present recorded his impressions. "One would have thought that our young people would have tired of this by now, but here they are in full force, screaming their heads off. One would have thought that nothing could top the greeting that these youth gave the first goat to cross the bridge nearly 6 months ago, but I do believe this crowd is even larger than that, and even louder if such a thing is possible. Now I'm going to try to ask this third goat some questions if I can." The reporter fought his way through the mass of his fellow reporters and photographers, as well as the stern-faced policemen standing about the goat. After a struggle, the reporter managed to ask, "Do you have any advice for the next goat to cross the bridge?" "There will be no more," the third goat replied in a shout. "I'm the last one." "No fourth goat?" The reporter sounded skeptical. As the police and the goat's team of assistants hustled him away, the goat managed to shake his head at the reporter. "Well, you heard it. The third goat has claimed that there will be no more after him. If that's true, I guess we can start calling him the last goat. I know several thousand teenagers who will be disappointed at that news. Back to you, Doug." The television relaying this report went dark. Captain Sudmush had switched it off. He turned to his colleagues gathered around the conference table. That was 7 months ago this Saturday, Sudmush said. There have been no goat crossings since that time. It seems possible there will be no more. Our agents on the other side can find no evidence of any more goats. However, as you have each learned from the top-secret dossiers in front of you, we now face a new visitor to our side. This troll, Secretary Farnsworth replied. Exactly, Sudmush confirmed. And where the 3 goats were, if a little refractory and high-spirited, mostly harmless and fun-loving, this troll is an outright menace, loud, abrasive, and crude. Payment is due when services are rendered. A raw place on Laird Foxfur's back was examined by the village doctor. You should have come to me sooner, the doctor shook his head as he washed his hands in a tin basin. I'm trying to keep a low profile, Foxfur explained with a worried note in his voice. I don't like to come into town if I can help it. You could have sent for me, the doctor dried his hands on a threadbare kitchen towel. You know where I live and how I live, but I don't like the idea of anybody else finding out. Foxfur drew his shirt back on. It was once an expensive shirt, but no one could tell that now. You can trust me, I hope, the doctor sat down on a high stool. I trust you to tell me what's wrong with my back, Foxfur retorted. The doctor removed his spectacles and pinched the bridge of his nose. He sighed. Laird, I think it's time you leveled with me, he said. What do you mean? Foxfur paused in the act of buttoning his shirt. You told me you were fleeing from a jealous husband, that you were hiding out there in that shoddy little cabin because you feared the wrath of this wealthy man whose wife you... That's true, Foxfur interrupted. What's this got to do with my back? You're not hiding from any wealthy, jealous husband, the doctor cut him off. You're hiding from the Pica Emperor. Although he said this forcefully, he mercifully kept his voice down. Foxfur stared at him a moment, then continued to button his shirt. He sighed. What if I am? Well, the doctor drawled, nothing. I guess you have your reasons. Dr. Fishfoot, what's wrong with my back? Foxfur demanded. You have a nupta-nail implanted in your spine, and it's beginning to emit the nuclear detection impulses that it was put there to emit. Foxfur glanced at the window in a panic. Only the Emperor's surgeons know how to implant the device, Fishfoot continued, or how to remove it. I gotta get out of here, Foxfur hissed. No cookies? After the beans had been delivered, Lyndon Franker climbed the steps to the first porch he came to and sat down on a wicker chair. He took off his hat and fanned himself with it as he watched the workmen across the street sawing boards in half. The screen door behind him opened, and a woman half his age emerged bearing a glass of lemonade. Franker began to rise from his chair. No, sit down, the woman urged him. She sat down on one of the other chairs and placed her glass on the table. I know who you are. Most people do in this town, Franker admitted. Would you like a glass of lemonade, she asked. Thank you. Mrs. Sharkmath? Franker guessed. Betty Sharkmath lives next door. I'm Tina Smeltow. Mrs. Smeltow rose from her chair. I'll be right back, she promised. Even before she entered the house, Franker was pulling out the vial of sleeping potion that he would add to her drink. By the time she returned, the 3 or 4 drops had already spread throughout the lemonade. By whatever process it is that additives work their way through a fluid. Franker took a deep swallow of his lemonade and pronounced it good. Do you want some more? Mrs. Smeltow asked. No, this is more than enough, Franker replied as he thought. Drink it, woman, drink it, woman. He engaged Mrs. Smeltow in folksy small talk until she suddenly fell unconscious in her chair. Franker assured himself that she wouldn't fall out of the chair and went into the house. This is the best part, he said to himself. This feeling of being in someone else's home, free to rummage through whatever I want. He began with the closets in the bedroom at the rear of the house, puzzling over various photographs and items and noting the similarities between many other houses he had been through. Why is it so many people have one of these stuffed squirrels dressed in cowboy clothes and mounted on a pedestal? He asked himself just as he heard the front door open. Reaching into a pocket of his old man's chinos, he withdrew the paralyzer cylinder. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it. Of course, as imperial prefect of this artificial town, he could ramble through any building he liked, but he wanted to keep everyone ignorant of his activities. Let's see here. I think that's good enough for now. See you next time.